She thought she was just knocking for work, a day's pay, maybe a warm corner to sleep. But when Esther Whitley, a tired widow with nothing left but her dignity, opened that crooked cabin door, she didn't find a man waiting. She found 7 children huddled by a dying fire with eyes too hollow for their age. "We've been waiting," the littlest one said. "For who?" Esther asked. "For someone who won't leave." Their father had vanished months ago. The snow kept falling, and no one else had come. Esther could have turned around. She had nothing, no home, no kin, no promise. But what she saw in those children was a reflection of the girl she once was, hungry, forgotten, hoping anyone would stay. And so she stayed. But what happened next? When the missing father finally returns, when he walks in and finds a stranger in his home, feeding his children, earning their trust, when old wounds surface and new love begins to bloom where no one expected it, that's the story we're about to tell. A story of quiet healing in a time of noise, of how a woman the world discarded became the heart of a home, and how sometimes family is not who you're born to, but who stays when no one else will. This isn't just a Western tale. It's a story about what we all crave as we get older, to matter, to be chosen, to be loved for who we are. Will you walk with us into the firelight and see what happens when love arrives? Unannounced, press play. The children are still waiting. The road to Pine Hollow wasn't marked on any map. It twisted through bramble and shale, past a dying creek bed and the bones of an old mining town. Esther Winlow, wrapped in a sun-faded shawl and burdened with a bundle of neatly folded clothes, followed it without asking where it ended. She was 51, and the years had softened and sharpened her in equal measure. Her cheeks were round but pale, her back straight but weary. Every step echoed with the hush of things she no longer said, not since she'd been turned away from 3 ranches for being too old, too slow, or too plain to look at over breakfast. This morning she hadn't meant to keep walking, but the wind had whispered low and persistent, and her shoes had followed. She came to the cabin around dusk. Smoke still rose from the chimney in loose curls, and lamplight shimmered behind the windows like breath behind glass. Her hand hesitated before it knocked. 3 quick taps, then nothing. The door creaked open, not by a man, not even by a woman, but by a boy of about 10, holding a poker in one hand and a girl clinging to his side. Behind them, 5 more children sat in a crooked circle near the fire, eyes, wide mouths quiet. "Is your father home?" Esther asked, voice hushed with manners long practiced. The boy shook his head slowly. "He left." She blinked. "Will he be back soon?" "No, ma'am," he said. "He died last winter." Esther stood frozen, hands still clutching the strap of her bag. The children didn't cry. They just stared at her the way trees do in a storm, steady but desperate not to fall. No one invited her in, but she stepped over the threshold anyway. There are moments when a life turns not with a shout, but a silence too large to ignore. 7 children, 1 quiet woman, a cabin on the edge of nowhere. What happens next? Esther Winlow had always believed in keeping her apron folded and her expectations lower. But that night, standing before 7 hollow-eyed children, she unfolded both slowly, reverently, like linen saved for Sundays. "I'll boil water," she said softly, setting down her bundle. The cabin was cold despite the fire, not because the wood hadn't been lit, but because the room had been missing something warmer than flame, a kind presence. She found onions in a crate, 1 carrot, dried beans, a rind of salt pork so old it crumbled under her blade. She worked without comment. The oldest boy, who said his name was Micah, watched her movements like someone measuring time. The youngest, a toddler named Eliza, curled into her lap as if she'd done so all her life. No child had cried. That's what struck Esther most. Hunger had turned into quietness. Later, Micah explained. "Papa got sick midwinter, wouldn't go to town, said the snow would kill him before the fever did." Esther didn't interrupt. "He made us promise to keep the place going. No one's come up here in months. Thought you were someone else." Who, he didn't answer. That night, Esther slept by the hearth. Not in the bed, not on the cot she'd offered both to the younger ones. She lay near the dying coals and listened to 7 small breaths. Something in her had cracked open, not in pain, but in recognition. This wasn't a job. Not yet. This was something stranger. She thought of all the doors she'd knocked on, all the meals she hadn't been asked to stay for. This time, no one had asked her in, but no one had told her to leave. 7 children, no man, and a widow who never meant to stay. But how long can silence hold before someone starts to call it home? The next morning, Esther rose before the sun. The cabin was hushed save for the shifting sighs of sleeping children. She moved like a whisper, lighting the stove boiling water, slicing the bread thinner than she'd ever dared before. Her fingers were stiff with cold and age, but her heart felt strangely awake, not from rest, but from purpose. As the children stirred, she noticed again what she hadn't let herself feel the night before. There were no men's boots by the door, no muddy coat hung by the hook, no sign that a father or anyone older than Micah would be returning. That morning, while brushing out Eliza's curls, Esther gently asked, "Is your papa coming back soon?" Micah didn't look up from splitting kindling. "I don't know," a girl with freckles, Joni added. "He was coughing real hard. He told Micah to keep us warm. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks." Esther's stomach clenched not from fear but from knowing. She'd seen it before. Illness sweeping through cabins like wind through canyon grass. Men too proud to call for help. Families trying to survive without even saying the word gone. And yet no one had claimed it. No one had let grief in. That day she scrubbed the floors. She taught the younger ones to fold linens to measure oats with care. She sang softly while boiling laundry, not because anyone had asked, but because the silence was starting to feel too heavy. At dusk, while the children did chores, she stepped outside just a moment to breathe. That's when she saw the lone rider on the ridge. Tall, straight-backed, watching the cabin like he wasn't sure whether to ride down or turn back. He stayed there a moment, then disappeared over the rise. Esther didn't speak of it to the children, but she kept the lamp lit long after they'd fallen asleep. A man on the ridge, a woman standing in the doorway, and 7 children who don't yet know what it means to be claimed. What happens when past and future meet in one flickering light? On the third morning, the fog clung low to the ground like something ashamed to rise. Esther wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped into the cold kitchen, still lit only by embers and memory. The children were quieter now, not sad, not afraid, but in that waiting stillness only orphans know before someone dares say the word. She knew the man would not return, but she also knew not to declare it until they were ready. That afternoon, while searching for spare quilts, Esther knelt near a lifted floorboard in the corner pantry. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a folded letter. Her hands hesitated, not from fear, from reverence. The paper was worn, written in a hand that tried to stay strong. "To whoever finds this, if I do not come back, please don't leave them alone. Their mother died last winter. I've done what I can. Micah is strong, but he's still a boy. Esther Lovell. If you're the one reading this, I heard of your name from the church at Carbon Ridge. I was going to write you myself, but ran out of time. If there's any mercy in you, stay." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. She sat on the floor, the wind rattling the window pane, and for a long time she let herself cry, not from pity, but from recognition. Somewhere someone had said her name and thought she might be enough. She folded the letter again, and this time she put it not back under the floorboard, but in the front pocket of her worn apron, where it would be close. That evening she made stew from the last root vegetables and set the table for 8. When Micah sat down, he glanced toward the chair at the head. "I think you should sit there," he whispered. "I'm just helping out," she answered, her voice soft. He looked at her eyes too old for his face. "No, ma'am. You're the only one who hasn't left. A name and a letter, a chair at a table, and a boy asking a woman to lead what's left of a home. But is she willing to stay where no one has said the word love?" The next Sunday, the snow let up just enough to make the road passable again, though it wasn't a road so much as a stubborn trail carved by memory and worn boots. Esther rose before the children and packed bread, cheese, and 2 jars of preserved peaches. Not for them, for the man whose name was never signed, but whose absence was louder than any gunshot. She was going to the ridge. She needed to know. It was Micah who found her lacing her boots, a quiet shadow behind the door. "You think he's out there?" He asked, not with hope, but with something more fragile, the need to stop wondering. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we won't rest easy till we try." He didn't speak again, but he followed her out. They crossed fields where only wind kept the fence lines company. Up the ridge through thinning trees and creaking snow, until the ground rose harder, sharper. It was midday when they saw it, a cabin slumped sideways, the roof half caved. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney. Inside, a man sat in a chair with his leg in splints, his eyes glassy with fever and stubbornness. His beard had grown wild. He didn't rise, didn't smile, but his voice cracked when he saw the boy. "Micah," he said, then turned toward Esther and said it again, like a prayer. Esther Lovell. She knelt beside him, checking the wound, a festering gash from a splintered wagon axle days old. He'd tried to crawl to town. Failed. Laid there waiting. "You should have let someone help," she murmured, cleaning the wound. "I did," he whispered back. "That's why I wrote your name." He didn't beg, didn't explain. Just looked at her like a man hoping heaven would accept a late confession. And something in her softened. Maybe because she knew what it was to be abandoned, to be looked at and passed over. Or maybe because she'd never been the one anyone wrote to until now. They made a sled from fallen limbs, and Micah helped pull. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, night was settling in, and the children came out in a hush. He was still weak, still silent. But in the morning, when the youngest girl climbed onto the bed beside him and curled under his arm, he didn't flinch. Neither did Esther when she found herself cooking extra bacon and pouring 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. He wrote her name when he thought no one else would come. But what happens when a woman who's always been sent away is finally the one asked to stay? The days that followed were thick with thawing snow and quiet reckonings. Esther tended the farmhouse like it had always been hers, and the children no longer asked where their father was, because he was there now. Quiet, healing, trying. Jonas Callahan. Once the ghost at the edge of the children's stories, now sat wrapped in quilts on the parlor settee. His leg propped up, his pride lowered like a drawbridge. He was no longer the man who'd vanished, but neither was he yet the father they deserved. One morning, Esther was peeling potatoes when he finally asked, voice rough as a barn door's hinge, "Why didn't you turn around that first day?" She didn't stop slicing, because 7 children had no supper and no shoes. He stared at her. "But I wasn't here, and I never sent for you." She placed the knife down gently. "I know." There it was, the reckoning, the hurt, the space between what was expected and what was chosen. "You were supposed to be a cook," he said, "not their mother." She tilted her head. "And you were supposed to be a husband, but you left instead." The room was quiet as snowfall. Then he whispered, "I didn't think I was worth staying for." Esther's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Then maybe you needed someone who didn't come for you, but stayed for them." Later that night, after the children had gone to sleep, she found a note by her pillow. "Esther, I don't know how to be good, but if there's still time, I'd like to learn. Jay." She folded it and placed it near the stove's warmth, letting it rest there like an unopened gift. She wasn't ready to answer yet, but maybe for the first time in her long and wandering life, she didn't need to rush. She was only supposed to cook and clean. He was only supposed to recover and leave. But when broken people speak the truth, will they finally choose to stay? The land thawed, and with it, so did the silence between Esther and Jonas. It didn't happen in one grand moment, not with flowers, not with a sudden kiss beneath the cottonwoods. No, it came quietly, the way the first green shoots push through snowmelt. One breakfast at a time, one sock mended, one porch chair shared in silence while the sun went down. The children were the first to say it out loud. Mama Little Gideon mumbled sleep heavy when Esther tucked him in one night. She froze, breath caught. He blinked. "I mean, I didn't mean," but Esther touched his hair. "It's all right," she whispered, tears catching in her throat. "It's all right, sweetheart." After that, the others followed. Even Clara, the oldest, who had once folded her arms tightest across her chest, began helping Esther shell peas in the afternoons, humming songs her real mother used to sing, letting the new woman sitting beside her carry the tune forward. And then there was Jonas. He walked again, not without a limp, but with the steadiness of someone who finally knew where he belonged. And one evening, as the children ran across the pasture catching fireflies, he stood beside Esther on the porch and handed her a little wooden box. Inside was a ring, not gold, just carved pine, smoothed and oiled, but made by his own hands. "I never knew how to ask right," he said, looking out toward the dusk. but I reckon I've learned something about love watching you give it." She said nothing, just slipped the ring on and held his hand. The wind moved soft through the grass. The mountains watched in quiet approval. And in time, folks down in town stopped calling her the cook. They didn't even call her the widow. They called her Esther Callahan, mother of 7, and wife to a man who had finally stayed. She came to warm a fire and ended up warming 7 hearts. But in giving them a home, did she finally find one of her own? Would you like to see more stories like this in the quiet corners of the West? Stories like Esther's don't make the headlines. They unfold slowly like a fire built from kindness, a woman who gave when she had little, and in return found more than she ever dreamed: a family, a place to belong, and a man who saw her not as someone hired to help, but as someone worth staying for. We live in a world that often forgets people like Esther. But maybe, if we slow down enough, we'll see that the greatest transformations come not through grand gestures, but through the smallest acts of love. A bowl of stew shared with hungry children, a hand placed gently on a tired shoulder, a choice to stay. And perhaps that's something we can all carry with us, that no matter how many doors have closed, it only takes one open one to change everything. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to become part of our little campfire here on None. Wild West Saga. Subscribe to stay close to these healing tales. Share this video with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. And in the comments, tell us, would you like to see more stories like this one? Would you want to know what became of Esther and her new family? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may you always find light in unexpected places.